The Cathari homeworld was not a place for the weak. Towering black spires stretched into the blood-red sky, their surfaces carved with the scars of battle. The air carried the scent of burning metal and something darker, something that made most species tremble. Dr. Leon Cade had seen many alien worlds before, but this one sent a chill through him. He stood on a landing platform, surrounded by Cathari warriors. They were tall, their bodies covered in a mix of smooth, chitinous armor and deep scars, marks of honor among their kind. Their eyes, glowing like molten silver, watched him with curiosity. No human had ever set foot on their world before. At the center of the platform stood Empress Xalthera Weiss. She was taller than the others, her obsidian armor gleaming in the dim light. Long, braided strands of midnight blue hair framed a face as sharp as a blade. Her expression was unreadable, but Leon could feel the weight of her gaze. She was testing him, measuring his worth before he even spoke. "Human," she said, her voice like a slow-burning fire. "You claim to represent your people. You wish for peace, but among my kind, strength is the only language worth hearing." Leon kept his posture relaxed, though he could feel his heart pounding. "Strength comes in many forms, Empress," he replied. "Pain is not the only way to prove one's worth." A low murmur passed through the gathered warriors. To them, his words were foolish, maybe even insulting. The Cathari revered pain. It was their foundation, their culture, their way of life. They welcomed suffering as others welcomed love. Xalthera took a step forward, her silver eyes narrowing. "Then tell me, human," she said slowly, "if not through pain, how do you measure strength?" Leon knew this was his moment. If he failed to answer well, the Cathari would never take humanity seriously. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Strength," he said, "is not just about enduring suffering. It is about overcoming it. It is about building, not just surviving. It is about finding joy, even in the darkest times." Silence. The Cathari had never heard such an idea before. Then, Xalthera smirked, a dangerous expression. "Fascinating," she said. "Let us test your words." She raised a hand, and from the shadows stepped a warrior nearly twice Leon's size. His armor was scared, his claws tipped with metal. He slammed a fist against his chest in salute, then turned to the Empress. "If he cannot endure, he is not worthy," the warrior growled. Leon tensed. He had seen Cathari duels before. They did not fight to kill, but to break. Pain was the measure of their strength. He had no chance against one of their warriors in a contest of suffering. But he wasn't here to play by their rules. "Wait," Leon said, raising a hand. "I accept the challenge, but on different terms." Xalthera tilted her head. "Different terms?" Leon nodded. "You test strength through pain. I challenge you to test strength through something else." "Now," the warriors laughed, sharp, cruel sounds echoing through the air. But Xalthera did not laugh. She studied Leon, intrigued. "Very well," she said at last. "What do you propose?" Leon met her gaze. "Let me show you the strength of pleasure." The laughter stopped. For the first time, the Cathari Empress looked uncertain. Leon followed Empress Xalthera Weiss through the towering halls of the Cathari citadel. The walls were carved with intricate battle scenes, figures locked in combat, their bodies etched with deep scars. Flickering torches cast long shadows, making the place feel like a temple of war. The Empress moved with a predator's grace, her midnight blue hair swaying as she walked. Her armor, dark and gleaming, fit her tall, powerful form like a second skin. She did not speak, but Leon could feel her attention on him, sharp as a blade. Finally, they entered a vast chamber. The floor was made of polished black stone, and in the center stood a circular platform, surrounded by Cathari warriors. Their glowing silver eyes followed Leon as he stepped inside. The tension in the air was heavy. Xalthera turned to face him. "You claim strength is not just in pain," she said, her voice calm but challenging. "Prove it." Leon took a breath. He had expected this. He wasn't a fighter, not in their way. He wasn't here to endure pain. He was here to change their understanding of it. He glanced at the gathered warriors, then at Salthera herself. She was their leader, their symbol of power. If he wanted to make them see things differently, he had to start with her. Leon stepped forward. "With your permission, Empress, I would like to demonstrate something." Salthera raised an eyebrow. "A demonstration?" Leon nodded. "A human custom. Trust me." The Catheri did not trust easily. But Salthera was not like the others. She was curious. She would not have brought him here otherwise. After a long pause, she gave a single nod. "Very well." Leon slowly reached out a hand toward her arm. The warriors around them tensed. To touch the Empress without invitation was an offense punishable by death. But Salthera did not move away. She allowed it. His fingers brushed against the cold surface of her armor. Then, with careful precision, he found a gap between the plates and let his fingertips graze the bare skin beneath. Salthera's body went rigid. It was the lightest touch, gentle, warm, a stark contrast to the harsh, brutal contact her people were used to. It wasn't pain. It wasn't suffering. It was something entirely different. Leon's fingers traced a slow path along her forearm, the motion soothing rather than aggressive. He felt the tension in her muscles, the way she was instinctively prepared for an attack that never came. The chamber was utterly silent. The Catheri warriors stared, confused. This was not a display of strength as they understood it. This was something else. Salthera's breath was slow, controlled, but something flickered in her silver eyes. A hesitation, a realization. Leon withdrew his hand and took a step back. "That," he said, "is strength too." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Salthera tilted her head slightly, as if considering something she had never thought possible. "You believe such softness has power?" she asked at last. Leon held her gaze. "I don't believe it. I know it." The Empress studied him, and for the first time since their meeting, she smiled. Not the sharp, knowing smirk of a conqueror, but something smaller, something thoughtful. "This," she said, lifting her arm as if testing the lingering sensation, "will require further discussion." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Leon standing in the center of a stunned and silent audience. The challenge had only just begun. Leon sat in the dimly lit chamber, surrounded by the strange beauty of the Catheri palace. The walls were carved from obsidian stone, etched with symbols of battle and honor. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting jagged shadows across the room. It was a place built on suffering, where pain was not just endured but celebrated. And yet, for the first time, Leon had planted a seed of something different. He glanced across the room at Empress Salthera Weiss, who stood by a tall window, her midnight blue hair catching the firelight. Her sharp features were unreadable, but Leon could tell she was thinking. The way she flexed her fingers, as if still feeling the ghost of his touch, told him more than words ever could. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, she turned to him. "I have never felt anything like that before," she admitted, her voice measured but quiet. "Your kind, you seek this feeling often." Leon nodded. "Humans crave connection. We find strength in pleasure, in comfort. It's not weakness, it's another kind of power." Salthera tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing. "Power? Explain." Leon leaned forward slightly. "Pain teaches endurance, yes. It teaches survival. But pleasure, true pleasure, teaches trust. It builds something greater than just strength. It forges bonds." She considered this, tapping a clawed finger against her armored wrist. "My people would see such a thing as weakness." "But do you?" Leon challenged gently. Salthera went still. The question hung in the air like a blade. The Empress was feared across the stars. She had never known softness, never been given anything but war and suffering. And yet, For one brief moment, when Leon had touched her, she had felt something new. "Come here," she commanded suddenly. Leon hesitated, not out of fear, but because he wasn't sure what she intended. But he had come this far. He stood and crossed the room. Zelthera lifted her arm, the same one he had touched before, and turned it so the scared inside of her wrist faced him. "Do it again," she ordered. Leon met her gaze. There was no threat in her tone, no challenge, only curiosity. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and traced his fingers along her wrist, gliding over old battle scars, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingertips. Zelthera inhaled sharply. It wasn't pain. It wasn't suffering. It was something entirely foreign to her. For the first time in her life, she understood what it was to be soothed. Her silver eyes flickered with something almost like fear. Not of him, but of the feeling itself. Leon didn't press further. He withdrew his hand and stepped back, giving her space. "It's not something to fear," he said quietly. Zelthera clenched her fist, as if testing the lingering sensation. Her expression hardened, but not in anger, more like she was trying to regain control of herself. "This is dangerous," she murmured, mostly to herself. Leon frowned. "Why?" She turned away, looking out the window at the city below. "If my people knew what I allowed you to do, if they knew I felt something other than pain, they would see it as betrayal." Leon's stomach tightened. "Then why allow it?" Zelthera exhaled slowly. "Because now that I have felt it, I cannot ignore it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the alien sky burned red, and the sounds of the warrior city echoed in the distance. The empress of a brutal empire had just tasted something forbidden. And deep down, Leon knew this was only the beginning. Zelthera stood alone in her private chamber, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass. The torches lining the walls flickered, casting an eerie glow on her obsidian armor. Her silver eyes, so used to burning with the fire of battle, now held something unfamiliar: uncertainty. She flexed her fingers, remembering the way Leon's touch had felt. It had not burned. It had not torn her flesh. It had simply been warm, soft, a sensation that lingered long after he had stepped away. Why did it unsettle her? The Cathari believed in strength through suffering. Pain was sacred. It made them fierce, unbreakable. But what if there was another kind of strength, one her people had never considered? A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Enter," she commanded. The door slid open with a hiss, and General Valor, her most loyal warrior, stepped inside. His towering form was covered in battle-scarred armor, his piercing silver eyes scanning her with concern. "My Empress," Valor said, bowing his head. "The warriors are restless. They do not understand why the human still lives." Zelthera turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Leon Cade is not a threat." Valor frowned. "He is weak. He does not fight. He does not embrace pain. He speaks of." He hesitated, his face twisting as if the words were distasteful. "Pleasure." Zelthera narrowed her eyes. "And yet he walked into our world unarmed, surrounded by warriors who could have torn him apart. Tell me, Valor, does that sound weak to you?" The general clenched his jaw but said nothing. "I have allowed him to remain because he brings something different," Zelthera continued. "Something I do not yet understand." Valor studied her carefully. "You are not like other Cathari, my Empress. Your mind is sharp as your blade. But I fear this human fills it with dangerous thoughts." Zelthera stepped closer, her presence commanding. "Dangerous thoughts," she echoed. "Or new possibilities." Valor hesitated. He had fought beside her for years, had seen her cut down enemies without mercy. But now, there was something different in her eyes, a quiet storm. "Keep the warriors in line," she ordered. "Leon Cade is my concern." Valor exhaled sharply, then nodded. "As you command." He bowed and left, though his tension lingered in the air. Zalthera turned back to the window, her mind racing. Leon was different from any being she had encountered. He did not seek to conquer, yet he was not afraid. He spoke of strength not through suffering, but through something else entirely. And worst of all, when he touched her, she had not recoiled. She had wanted to understand more. With a sigh, she turned and strode toward the chamber where Leon was staying. If he had come to challenge the very foundation of her people's beliefs, she would confront him head-on. But what she did not yet realize was that the battle she faced now was not against him. It was against herself. Leon sat in the quiet chamber assigned to him, watching the dim torchlight flicker against the stone walls. The room was simple, built for warriors, not comfort. The bed was little more than a slab, the air thick with the scent of metal and incense. Yet despite the cold surroundings, Leon felt something shifting in this place, something deeper than just politics or survival. The door slid open without warning. Empress Zalthera Weiss stepped inside, her tall frame casting a long shadow. Her midnight blue hair framed her face in sharp, elegant braids, and her silver eyes were locked onto him with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Leon stood. He had seen her in many states, calculating, ruthless, amused. But now she was something else. Conflicted. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she crossed the room, her movements controlled, as if holding back something dangerous. When she finally stopped, mere steps away from him, she spoke in a voice that was quieter than usual. "You confuse me, human." Leon met her gaze. How so? She studied him, searching for an answer she did not yet understand herself. "I have ruled for years, fought battles across countless worlds. I know strength. I know pain. But you speak of something else, and I do not know if I should crush it or listen." Leon kept his voice steady. Why listen at all, then? Zalthera clenched her jaw. She wasn't used to questioning herself, wasn't used to uncertainty. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him instead of ending this strange experiment before it went too far. She lifted her hand slightly, as if testing the memory of his touch. "When you laid your hand upon me," she said carefully, "it did not weaken me." Leon nodded. "No, it wouldn't." She narrowed her silver eyes. "Then what did it do?" He took a step closer, not enough to challenge her, but enough to meet her in this space between understanding and fear. "It gave you a choice," he said simply. "Your people believe pain is the only way to grow stronger. I'm showing you that there's another path." Zalthera's fingers curled into a fist, a path of softness. Leon shook his head. Not softness. Trust. Connection. Power doesn't have to come from suffering alone. Sometimes it comes from knowing you don't have to suffer at all. The Empress inhaled sharply. It was such a simple concept, yet it felt like the edge of a blade pressing against everything she had ever known. Leon didn't push further. He could see the battle raging within her, one more difficult than any she had fought before. Instead, he turned slightly, showing that he was not forcing her into this, that she could walk away. She didn't. Instead, after a long, tense moment, she lifted her hand again, her fingers hovering just above his. This time, it was her choice. Slowly, deliberately, she let her fingertips brush against the back of his hand. The contact was barely there, but it sent a shock through her system. It was foreign, uncharted territory. It was terrifying. But she didn't pull away. Leon stayed perfectly still, letting her test this moment on her own terms. He saw the way her silver eyes flickered, the way her breath slowed. Zalthera Weiss, ruler of the Kitheri, conqueror of worlds, had just taken a step into the unknown. And for the first time in her life, she did not see it as weakness. She saw it as a challenge. Zalthera had faced death countless times. She had fought battles that shook entire worlds, crushed rebellions with her bare hands, and stood unbroken against pain that would shatter weaker beings. But now, standing in the dim torchlight, her fingers resting against Leon's, she felt something far more dangerous than any weapon. Hesitation. She should have pulled away. She should have crushed this foreign sensation before it spread through her like wildfire. But she didn't. Leon didn't move, didn't push. He let her control the moment, let her decide what this meant. That, more than anything, was what unsettled her. No one had ever given her a choice before. Slowly, she withdrew her hand, curling her fingers into a tight fist, as if trying to reclaim her certainty. "This changes nothing," she said, though the words felt hollow even as they left her lips. Leon gave a small smile. "Doesn't it?" Zalthera turned sharply, her long midnight blue braids swaying behind her. She moved toward the window, staring down at the city below. From here, she could see the grand arenas, where warriors trained through blood and agony. The fires of the forge, where weapons were sharpened, never dulled by time. The streets, filled with Cathari who knew only one truth: pain was power. And yet, here was a human who defied that truth. "You do not understand my people," she said, keeping her back to him. "They will never accept this idea of yours." Leon stepped beside her, his presence warm even in the cold chamber. "Maybe not now. Maybe not ever. But what about you?" She turned her head slightly, silver eyes narrowing. "What are you implying?" Leon met her gaze without fear. "That you're not like them. If you were, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Silence. Zalthera clenched her jaw, her mind a battlefield of its own. He was right. She was different. She always had been. It was why she had risen to power so quickly, why she commanded both fear and respect among her kind. And it was why this was so dangerous. She turned fully to face him, arms crossed over her chest. "You are a fool, Leon Cade." He chuckled. "I get that a lot." Her lips twitched, just for a second. Then her expression hardened again. "If you wish to prove that strength exists beyond suffering, then you must do more than speak. Words will not change the Cathari." Leon nodded. He had expected this. "Then what will?" Zalthera studied him carefully. A challenge. Leon exhaled. "Of course." She took a step closer. "In 3 days, the trial of endurance will take place. It is one of our most sacred tests, a display of strength, of will. If you wish to show my people that there is power beyond pain, then stand before them and prove it." Leon's heart pounded. "And what happens if I fail?" Zalthera tilted her head, her silver eyes gleaming. "Then they will see you as weak." She paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "and I will no longer be able to protect you." Leon considered her words. This was it. A chance to prove himself, to prove humanity's strength in a way the Cathari would understand. He met her gaze, and despite the weight of what she was asking, he smiled. "Then I guess I better not fail." For the first time in her life, Zalthera Weiss did not know if she wanted someone to win for their sake, or for her own. The arena roared with the voices of thousands. Warriors pounded their fists against their chests, their battle cries shaking the air. The scent of burning incense and heated metal filled the massive stone coliseum, where the trial of endurance was about to begin. Leon stood in the center of the arena, his heart pounding like a war drum. He wasn't afraid. Not of pain, not of the challenge ahead. But he knew this wasn't just about survival. It was about proving something far greater than himself. At the high throne above, Empress Zalthera Weiss watched him with a steady gaze. She was dressed in her ceremonial black and silver armor, her midnight blue braids gleaming in the torchlight. Her face was unreadable, but Leon could feel the weight of her expectations. The trial keeper, an elder warrior draped in crimson robes, stepped forward. His voice boomed across the arena. "Leon Cade, outsider of Earth, you claim strength beyond suffering. You claim power without pain. Prove it now before the Cathari." The crowd erupted, some jeering, others watching with cold curiosity. Leon took a slow breath. "No pressure," he muttered to himself. The trial was simple in theory: endure and remain standing. But the Cathari's idea of endurance was brutal. Warriors had fallen to their knees in these tests. Some never walked away. A massive iron gate groaned open. Leon's first opponent stepped out, a towering Cathari warrior named Drelkar, his dark silver armor adorned with jagged spikes. His face bore old battle scars, and his yellow eyes burned with the hunger to crush the human before him. Leon had no weapons, no armor, only himself. Drelkar wasted no time. He charged, moving with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone so large. The ground trembled beneath his steps. Leon barely dodged as a massive fist slammed into the spot where he had stood. Dust and stone exploded outward. The crowd howled. Leon rolled to his feet. He had expected raw strength, but Cathari warriors weren't just brutes. They were trained, relentless. Pain was their language, and he had to speak something else. Drelkar swung again, and this time Leon didn't dodge. Instead, he moved with the strike, letting it graze past him instead of resisting. The impact sent him staggering, but he didn't fall. The crowd murmured. Drelkar growled and came at him harder, striking again and again. But each time, Leon adapted, absorbing, redirecting, never fighting pain with pain. He wasn't stronger, he wasn't faster, but he understood something they didn't. Drelkar roared in frustration and threw a final, wild punch. At the last second, Leon sidestepped and let Drelkar's own momentum carry him crashing into the ground. The Colosseum fell silent. Leon stood, breathing hard, but still standing, untouched. Then, a single Cathari warrior slammed his fist to his chest in respect. Another followed. Then another. Leon realized something. They weren't just obsessed with pain. They respected those who endured. And he had done just that. On the high throne, Zalthera leaned forward, her silver eyes locked on him. Leon looked up at her. He had passed the first trial. But this was far from over. And for the first time, Zalthera wasn't sure if she wanted him to stop. The arena was silent. Thousands of Cathari warriors, beings who lived by the rule of pain and suffering, watched the lone human standing unbroken in the trial's aftermath. Leon had endured without striking back, without giving in to their way. And yet, he stood, stronger than before. Atop the high throne, Empress Zalthera Weiss gripped the armrest, her silver eyes locked onto him. Something deep within her stirred, something she had never dared to name. Respect. The trial keeper stepped forward once more, his voice carrying through the stillness. Leon Cade, you have endured the trial. You remain standing, but one question remains. He turned toward Zalthera. Does the Empress accept this as strength? Every eye in the Colosseum shifted to their ruler. Zalthera rose from her seat, her long midnight blue braids glistening in the firelight. She could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty in her people. They had never seen a victory like this. Neither had she. Slowly, she descended the stone steps, her armored boots echoing against the ground. The warriors parted as she approached the center of the arena, stopping just a breath away from Leon. She studied him. His face was bruised, his breathing heavy, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Not the defiance of an enemy, but of a man who refused to accept that there was only one way to be strong. And he was right. Zalthera had spent her life believing power came from suffering. But what if true power was choosing not to suffer at all? She reached forward. Leon didn't flinch. Her fingertips brushed against his chest, right over his heart. A simple touch, yet it felt more significant than any battle she had ever fought. She turned to face the gathered warriors. Leon Cade has shown us a different kind of strength, she declared. He has stood where others have fallen, not through pain, not through violence, but through will. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, some in confusion. I was taught that pain is the only way to grow stronger, she continued. But today, I have seen something else, and I cannot ignore it. A pause. Then, She struck her fist to her chest, a gesture of respect. The sound echoed. One by one, warriors followed. A thunderous beat of fists against armor filled the Colosseum, a rhythm that spoke louder than words. Leon exhaled, exhaustion creeping in, but a small smile played at his lips. Zelthera met his gaze. "You came here as a stranger," she said, voice quieter now. "But you leave here as something more." He raised an eyebrow. "A friend." She smirked. "A challenge." Leon chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll take that." For the first time in Cathari history, the crowd cheered not for pain, but for something new. And as Galthera stood beside him, she knew this was only the beginning.